It is Friday, December 1st, and this is The National. Tonight, taking the conversation about consent and sexual misconduct into high schools. What does the next generation think?
Just days after announcing their engagement, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle met an adoring public. Think of it as a dress rehearsal for her role of a lifetime.
But we begin with a bombshell day for Donald Trump. The criminal investigation into possible collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign moved in a significant way right into the White House. Michael Flynn was once one of the president's most trusted men. Now he may be ready to testify against him.
Hey, Flynn! Flynn!
Michael Flynn, an early supporter of Donald Trump and his first national security advisor, admitted that he lied to the FBI about his conversations with Russia's ambassador to the United States. Specifically last December, after Barack Obama imposed new sanctions against Russia for meddling in the election, court documents show that Flynn spoke with an unnamed senior member of Trump's transition team about the presidential order. Flynn then called Sergei Kislyak and requested that Russia not escalate the situation. Days later, Kislyak called back and said Russia had chosen not to retaliate. Flynn is cooperating with Robert Mueller's investigation into possible coordination between Trump's campaign and the Kremlin to influence the 2016 election. Today, Flynn said, "I recognize that the actions I acknowledged in court today were wrong." The charge of making false statements to the FBI carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Today's sentencing guideline suggests Flynn could serve no more than 6 months in jail, if any time at all, and face a fine of up to $9,500. So that's what the deal means for Michael Flynn, but what does it mean for the Mueller investigation? Keith Bogue looks at that tonight.
Michael Flynn left the D.C. courthouse this morning to taunts of "lock him up." That was, of course, similar to the chant that Flynn himself had led about Hillary Clinton during the election campaign.
Lock her up. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Lock her up.
Whether it's Flynn who gets locked up in prison will likely depend on how valuable his future cooperation with the Robert Mueller investigation turns out to be. And that was the really big news today. Attached to Flynn's guilty plea were the conditions of his plea bargain. He's flipped, become a witness for the prosecution, and agreed to cooperate in every possible way. What it means is that as important a player in the Trump campaign and White House as he was, national security advisor after all, Mueller is willing to go easy on Flynn because he's after even bigger fish. The only bigger fish are the president and his family. The president's lawyer issued a statement this morning that read in part, "Nothing about the guilty plea or the charges implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn." But a few hours later, there were multiple reports that it was the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who had directed Flynn to make contact with the Russians last year. Mueller could confirm that with Flynn and likely already has. On Capitol Hill, high-ranking Republican senators are quoted as having been asked by the president this summer to shut down their investigations into his campaign's links to Russia. Add to that former FBI Director James Comey's testimony under oath that Trump had asked him to drop the investigation into Flynn, and the fact that Comey didn't, and then Trump fired him.
I think the American people and a lot of us asked, why is he so desperate to have this investigation stopped, particularly as we see more and more people either plead guilty or come forward under indictment.
Republicans seem to be trying to stay cool.
The process is working. The special counsel has a mandate. He seems to be fulfilling that mandate. This is the way the legal process works.
But there's no question the investigation took an important step closer to the Oval Office today. And because of that, Republicans have to consider carefully where this all might be leading them. Keith Bogue, CBC News, Washington.
So the Mueller investigation shows no signs of slowing down. To help connect the dots, take a look at this. The investigation into Donald Trump's possible collusion with Moscow has now snared 4 figures close to the president. Today, it's Michael Flynn. In October, campaign advisor George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to misleading the FBI over his Russia contacts. The same month, former campaign chair Paul Manafort and his deputy Rick Gates were each indicted on 12 counts, including conspiracy. Both have pleaded not guilty. So, who might be next? Well, there are at least 2 members of Trump's own family who have had interactions with Russians. Donald Trump Jr. agreed to meet a lawyer with close ties to the Kremlin. And Jared Kushner held meetings with a Russian banker appointed by President Vladimir Putin. So the question, will Michael Flynn prove to be the linchpin in Mueller's investigation into Team Trump? Those Russian connections are the key to the Mueller investigation, and I spoke about those with Luke Harding, a former Moscow correspondent for a UK newspaper, The Guardian. He studied Donald Trump's ties to Russia, and he's written a book called Collusion. I asked Harding what Michael Flynn might know which would take things closer to Trump.
I think if Flynn were to testify that he was effectively instructed by Donald Trump to get along with the Russians, to woo them, to please them, if you like, then the whole story of collusion, which has been kind of vehemently denied by Trump, looks to me more and more solid. And so we have to see where we go in the next kind of few months. But it's also worth remembering that Vladimir Putin's main foreign policy goal was to have America lift sanctions against Russia. And this is precisely what Flynn was discussing on the telephone with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, and what he lied about afterwards to the FBI.
You have studied Putin's inner circle very closely, so how do you think they reacted today to this news?
Well, I think the reaction from Putin will be mixed. On the one hand, Donald Trump has been a kind of president of chaos. He has further polarized America. He's caused enormous divisions, cultural, political, racial. As Putin sees it, that's good for Russia because it means Russia can do what it likes on the international stage. On the other hand, I think Putin is probably feeling a moment of kind of buyer's remorse. He backed Trump. He allegedly hacked emails to damage Hillary Clinton. But the problem is Trump is proving such an erratic president that he's been unable to deliver the one thing that Putin really wants, which is an end to U.S. sanctions.
Earlier this year, Trump rejected criticism of Flynn as fake news. You must find it gratifying that now it's before the courts where there is a clear line between lying and the truth.
I agree. I spent 4 years in Russia. The Russians, they didn't exactly invent fake news, but they're very good at it, pushing their kind of their story, if you like, into the international arena. And Donald Trump has been echoing this for practically a year. He's been saying his critics are lying, it's all fake news. And here we have these rather sober pieces of A4 paper, these indictments from Robert Mueller, laying out in a kind of linear way what it is that actually really happened. And it's, you might call it the revenge of empiricism, if you like. These are the facts which are coming back and biting Donald Trump. It's very uncomfortable reading for him. And I think he faces a further dilemma, which is, does he let this process continue and come to his door, or does he try and preempt it by perhaps firing Robert Mueller, which would set off the mother of all political and constitutional crisis in the United States?
The revenge of empiricism. Luke Harding in London. And a man once at the center of the Russia investigation seems to have weighed in on all of this from afar. I want to show you what former FBI Director James Comey tweeted today, just after Michael Flynn's guilty plea. But justice rolled down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Amos 5:24. One of the central themes of the book of Amos is God's outrage over the immoral and unjust behavior of the rich and powerful. There is much more to talk about on this story, and Andrew will chat with 2 people who know the story very well coming up in about 20 minutes.
Still to come. Okay, thanks. Well, in BC tonight, people are shocked and asking questions about what led a judge to stay a murder charge, effectively ending the case against a notorious gangster.
How do you expect me to accept that? I feel like screaming and running to the ends of the world today. My entire life just crumbled all over again.
That's the mother of one of 6 people killed in a high-profile crime in 2007, the so-called Syria 6. At the time, Jamie Bacon was the leader of a gang called the Red Scorpions. He was accused of being the mastermind behind the attack. The charges? Murder and conspiracy. He was expected to go on trial next spring. But today, a BC Supreme Court judge stayed the charges. Now, here's where things get murky. We don't know precisely why the judge made this decision. The reasons have been sealed by the court. We do know it has something to do with how police handled confidential information, but that's not a very satisfying answer. Here's BC's Attorney General.
When I learned of the court's decision to stay the charges for this individual, I was shocked, as I'm sure all British Columbians are right now. The families of the victims and all who have been impacted by this terrible crime deserve peace, and they will not find it today.
Eby went on to say an appeal is possible. Prosecutors will be looking over the decision. In the meantime, Bacon will remain in custody on a separate charge of counseling the murder of an individual. The Canadian finance minister may have had a rough month, but the Canadian economy did pretty well. It created 80,000 new jobs in November, and many of those were full-time. That's 8 times what was expected. And the good news isn't just from last month. It follows a banner year for job creation. And for the Liberal government, the timing helps. Here's David Cochrane.
Business is good in the byword market, where a hot economy means some sweet spending.
How's business?
Business so far, fantastic. Very good. We opening franchises around Ottawa so far, and we have one already in Metcalfe. So we're spending, and that gives you an idea of how good we're doing.
So if you're spending and expanding, that means you're hiring?
Yes.
55 employees at this location, 22 more at that second one she mentioned. 6 more shops opening over the next few years, creating hundreds of new jobs.
And those are full-time jobs?
That's correct.
So 22 full-time jobs over the past year you've added to this operation through expansion?
Yes.
It's the time for holiday spending, but the economy isn't just pumping out seasonal jobs, and it's not just this month. It's 12 straight months of growth, which has seen 390,000 jobs roar to life, pushing unemployment to its lowest rate since 2008 when the global financial crisis hit.
Order.
A year of good economics after weeks of tough politics.
Why doesn't he just do the right thing and resign? Yeah! Will the finance minister finally do the right thing and resign? Yeah!
With the opposition calling for Finance Minister Bill Morneau to quit, his boss has used the economy as a shield.
I have full confidence in the Minister of Finance, and one only has to look at the 500,000 new jobs to understand why.
These numbers make that shield stronger as the battle moves online, where the Liberals keep boasting and the Conservatives keep pushing for Morneau to lose his job while the economy creates thousands. David Cochrane, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, the message on this World AIDS Day seems to be unanimous. There's been major progress in the fight against HIV and AIDS, but there's still plenty more to be done.
HIV/AIDS is an epidemic that feeds on discrimination and exclusion, on communities such as gay men, transgender people, Aboriginal, Indigenous peoples throughout the world, people who inject drugs, sex workers, prisoners, people on the fringes of society.
The federal government hosted an international symposium on HIV/AIDS today. One of its key messages to the provinces: let's stop unfairly prosecuting people who don't disclose their HIV status to sexual partners. At issue, those cases where viral load is so low, there's virtually no risk of transmission to begin with. And today, Ontario announced it will stop pursuing criminal charges in those cases. That's being seen as progress. But of all the different groups in Canada, it is the Indigenous population that's been particularly hard hit by HIV, with much higher infection rates than the national average. And that's raised deep concern about inadequate testing in remote communities. Cameron McIntosh looks at one effort to fix that.
To put a probiotic component into that as well.
Canada's high-security, high-tech national HIV labs are full of leading-edge expertise and technology. Yet to break through one of HIV/AIDS' most daunting challenges, scientists here are going low-tech.
It doesn't matter what the hottest or the latest medical intervention, drugs, et cetera, it all starts with knowing what your status is.
John Kim is working on a new way to get through to the roughly 1 in 5 Canadians with HIV/AIDS who are undiagnosed.
This is something known as a dry blood spot card.
It's pretty simple. Prick a finger, dab some blood, mail it in. No doctors, no clinics.
What's the great advantage of this?
One, it's minimally invasive. Sometimes there's reasons why people do not want to access, standard healthcare services. One can be because of stigma, one can be because they're just not able to access them.
That's the challenge in Indigenous communities, where HIV rates can be more than twice the national average, yet testing rates are among Canada's lowest. Manitoba's Swan Lake First Nation sees it as an emerging crisis.
There's a lack of trust between the patient and the healthcare system in a number of cases. So I think that relationship needs to be repaired.
We can't just be sitting back and waiting for a sample to arrive in the laboratory.
Paul Sandstrom is the National Lab Director. Making headway in those communities is a priority.
It also prevents individuals from transmitting the virus onwards, and so there's a large public health impact.
With the blood spots, the idea is any trusted community member can administer the test.
And this is all you would need. This is all you would need. Like this would fit into a backpack.
All of it to try to trace and stop the virus's movement through a community. Martin is optimistic.
I certainly think that'd be a very viable approach.
The Public Health Agency of Canada plans to roll out a pilot project next year. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Now, whether it's in remote Indigenous communities or the heart of the city, the battle against AIDS can only benefit from public awareness. And that's something Prince Harry helped with again today, along with his fiancée, at an annual World AIDS Day charity event.
The Prince has been coming to this event for a few weeks now because it's World AIDS Day, and HIV is one of the Prince's main causes. I mean, when people of profile, particularly members of the royal family, support organisations like THT and other organisations, it really does raise the profile of the cause.
Today's appearance was the first official public engagement for Harry and Meghan Markle, and by all accounts, it went very well. But even for the star of a hugely popular TV show, the attention she got today must have felt at least a little overwhelming, which makes one hope that Markle is ready for the exposure that comes with being a royal. Because as Thomas Daigle tells us, she's about to get a lot more of it.
Call it on-the-job training. Her first steps in a world he's known his whole life.
He's a great fella, and I think he's chosen a really nice lady.
She's so progressive, she's so new to the royal family. I think it's amazing.
As an actor, Meghan Markle may be used to the spotlight, sure, but there's still a learning curve to becoming a royal.
Thank you. Happy Christmas.
Getting showered with admiration, even gifts, just for showing up.
I suspect they'll frame it. Probably
Remember the first outing together?
Yeah.
And staying humble enough to pick up a fan's lost glove.
Kate didn't go out on an engagement with William for some time after the engagement was announced, and here we are 4 or 5 days later. She's out on the road, and look at the reaction to her. People love her.
Hi, Ben.
At some points, the couple even bent the unwritten royal rules, getting rather touchy-feely in public.
Prince Harry has been here in Nottingham at least a half dozen times in recent years. He says it's a place that has a special place in his heart. That's why he wanted to share it with his fiancée in their first public outing together. And it seems Prince Harry has a special place in the hearts of many here in Nottingham.
And here's why. His work with local charities like this one, helping to reduce youth violence. Or across town at a World AIDS Day event, following in the footsteps of Harry's mother, Diana, who lent a caring touch to AIDS patients, while some still considered that risky.
A lot of people kind of, poo-poo them or say they're not important anymore and they're not relevant. And I think just today just shows how relevant they are, really.
They'll share many more outings like this. For Markle, it's a new job and a new life, with more royal firsts still ahead. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Nottingham, England.
Still to come tonight on The National, we'll return to our top story, Michael Flynn's guilty plea. 2 journalists who covered Donald Trump on what's next for the investigation and for the president.
Plus, a Quebec bill is supposed to address sexual harassment and assault on campus, but now a victim says it doesn't go far enough.
And from campuses to Hollywood, there is a lot of talk about sexual misconduct, but what do teenage girls have to say? We'll hear from them about headlines, consent, and what boys need to know.
Anytime when they want to withdraw that yes and say no, they have the right to.
If they say yes to something, like for a simple hug, it doesn't mean that they're okay with like something else.
overwhelming evidence against Ian Bush on this charge, and we say this is the proper, right, fair verdict. Ian Bush is a very dangerous man.
An Ottawa man already serving time for murdering 3 people has been found guilty of trying to kill someone else. Ian Bush was convicted in connection with an attack on a Second World War veteran. Bush entered Ernest Cote's house, tied him up, robbed him, and left him for dead. Cote survived the attack, but died 3 months later.
I felt like maybe just for a short time, I don't know how much time it will take, but at this moment, my dignity is preserved.
It's good news for those who thought Quebec's latest foray into religious neutrality went too far. A judge has suspended a section of that controversial new law that prevents people who are wearing face coverings from accessing public services. The suspension will remain in place until the Quebec government provides more details on how the ban will actually work. A ruling today could make it easier for Toronto home buyers to access detailed market data, including what homes previously sold for. The Federal Court of Appeal upheld an earlier ruling that that kind of thing should be public, and this could ripple out. It could set a precedent in other markets right across the country, possibly making it easier to buy and sell real estate without an agent. However, the Toronto Real Estate Board says it does plan to appeal. Well, long before the fall of Harvey Weinstein raised issues of power and consent, Quebec has been alarmed by sexual violence on post-secondary campuses. One survey suggested a quarter of all students had been abused, harassed, or coerced.
We need a process to make the victim feel safe to go and make a complaint and to be followed and to be held.
So last month, the government tabled a bill to force those institutions to put policies in place, like a complaint procedure and a code of conduct for intimate relationships between students and staff. But that bill doesn't address one particular murky area. If a staff member is punished for misconduct, some universities argue that can't be divulged, not even to victims, because of provincial privacy rules. Véronique Pronovost knows all about that shroud of secrecy. She says she's still in the dark 6 years after an encounter with a professor left her reeling.
I was feeling very alone, and I didn't really know how to react. I felt like, who am I as a little student to bother the life of a well-known and established professor? During a party mid-semester, he became very much insistent, and he was trying to kiss me and kiss me and kiss me. And at the end of the evening, he just took my hand and put it into his pants directly, just like that. I felt ashamed because I felt like maybe I did not do enough, like I should have been more distant, or more, my no should have been louder, or I should have pushed him. I had been drinking, he had been drinking. I wrote him an email to the professor a few days after saying, you know what, I'm really not comfortable with what happened. And he basically answered me, you know what, we're 2 adults, it was consensual. He informed me that it was consensual and that he was not a pig. It took me 3 years before to file the complaint. When I saw the sticker gate, all these stickers on the door on some professors at UQAM, it all brought back everything that had happened.
The students decided to name and shame 3 professors they accuse of sexual harassment.
Some people from the administration of UQAM go in the media and say, you know, there are no official complaints, and as long as there are no official complaints, there are no problem of sexual violence on campus. And that made me go mad. My complaint was taken very seriously. The office here decided to meet me and give me the report saying, congratulations, we're ruling on your side. But, well, you'll never know what happened. That's when my second time I went mad in a way, because I didn't understand what was going on. You're telling me I win, but you're not telling me what's going to happen with the professor. How can I get a relief out of that? How can I get any kind of closure? Fortunately, I do see him on campus. You just turn the corner, he's there, and you have to face the situation. Do I encourage everyone to go forward and make a complaint? I think it depends a lot of the person, of the situation. Why would victims go forward and make a complaint if they don't get anything back in terms of closure or anything like that at the end of the process? So I'm one of the very few who won, but I don't have the feeling that I won anything.
The university told CBC News, universities are not against divulging sanctions, but right now the law does not authorize us to do that. Now that may change. Quebec's Minister of Higher Education is saying she's open to amending her bill to better loop in victims in some cases.
Needless to say, students form their views on sex and consent well before university, and so high schools can't ignore the current conversation.
There's a problem in society, and we're part of society, so it's magnified here in our schools, especially, you know, when you look in these hallways in the teenage years and, you know, testosterone, estrogen, kids are all over the place.
In the Toronto District School Board, students learn about consent in grade 9. Christine Birak asked to meet with some of them to see how they're dealing with endless news about sexual misconduct.
Inside these halls, they are talking about it. The growing list of sexual consent scandals.
Women alleging sexual wrongdoing by a high-profile man, a swift response from employers, a version of an apology, and what's now clear, you just cannot be surprised.
We asked some grade 9 students to tell us what they think and how they feel about it all. Although no boys stepped forward, these 14-year-old girls said, "Let's talk."
What's your impression of what's going on, and what names have stood out for you?
Harvey Weinstein, I think. The reason why these women stayed silent for so long was because they thought nothing would change, or they weren't powerful as him. And I think if they all stood up like what they're doing now, this would have been solved a long time ago.
So do you wonder why it took so long?
Yeah, I wonder why it took so long.
And so what sorts of questions do you guys have about what's happening?
Like, how did it lead to this?
Mm-hmm. Why aren't people like standing up for this just because that one person is powerful? Why isn't like hundreds of people like just stopping it?
Mm-hmm. And so my understanding and why we came to talk to grade 9s was you start to learn about sexual consent in grade 9. So I'd like to get a sense from each of you what so far you've taken away from that class, and what have you learned?
If someone says yes, that also means that anytime when they want to withdraw that yes and say no, they have the right to.
And if you think about it, consent is something that you could give or take away at any moment.
And one other thing is that if they say yes to something, like for a simple hug, it doesn't mean that they're okay with like something else, like holding hands or something. So you should ask consent every time.
Do you guys feel like enough people understand that?
No.
How do you guys feel about the fact that no boys wanted to come talk about this today?
I'm like quite disappointed because like right now in the media it's about like men assaulting women, so like wouldn't it be important to know about what they think about consent comparing to what we think about consent?
So why do you think they're not here?
Honestly, I just think they're scared. They don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Because if you talk bad about, if someone talks bad about your gender, you don't really know how to reply.
You think you're wrong.
Yeah. Just because these group of men are doing something bad, it doesn't mean that we should look at all men the same, because they are human and they have their own opinion. Yeah. And I kind of want to know what they feel.
What do you guys think about, you know, going forward, especially with what you're hearing? Do you think that it won't be the same in the future?
Hopefully it's not the same.
I hope.
Yeah, I see more and more women standing up, and if everyone, you know, not just women, like guys too, like understand what's going on, I feel like it can make the the world a better place.
You guys are amazing. Yeah. Really amazing.
More conversations like that. That would be a good thing. Okay, ahead tonight on The National. They make up half the population, but Syrian women don't have a strong voice in the country's future. We're going to hear from one woman fighting to change that.
And more in our top story, former Trump loyalist Michael Flynn cooperating with the investigation into his old boss. We'll talk to two journalists who have been following this very closely.
Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up! Convicted criminal! Criminal! Lock him up!
Let's get back to our top story now. The guilty plea today by Donald Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. He admitted to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russia's then ambassador to the United States. And to help with some analysis, we're joined by two journalists who have reported extensively on this story. Philip Bump is in New York. He works for the Washington Post. Ken Vogel is in Washington. He works for the New York Times. And Kenneth, let's begin with you. What's the significance of the guilty plea today?
Well, the significance is that it gets things pretty close to the prime target of this investigation, which is the President of the United States, Donald Trump. We have in the papers submitted by the Mueller team to the court that included the charges to which Flynn pled guilty. Two senior officials with whom Flynn talked before a particular conversation with the then Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. It doesn't name those officials, but subsequent reporting is pointing strongly in the direction of one of them being Jared Kushner, none other than the president's son-in-law and one of his closest advisors. The other, K.T. McFarland, a deputy national security advisor. Here you have not collusion, but conversations and interaction with the Russians being undertaken by Flynn that was at the direction of the senior-most people around Donald Trump, if not Donald Trump himself, during the transition period.
And Philip, pick up on that. Closer, but just how close are we to the president here?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, we don't know a whole lot about what Robert Mueller knows that we don't, right? I mean, we've sort of had a couple of things sprung on us over the course of the past month and a half or so, beginning with the Manafort indictments at the end of October. But it's important to note that we now know there are at least two people who are probably working with Robert Mueller, who are people who had some sort of association with Donald Trump or his campaign, who now are actively working to provide testimony to Mueller, or who are willing to actually speak as to what was happening more broadly. Those are, of course, Flynn, who we believe very strongly to be someone who has made a deal with Robert Mueller, and he wouldn't, Robert Mueller's not going to make a deal if all Flynn is going to give him is some, random lower-level staffer. There's some significance to that, but then there's also George Papadopoulos, who we believe to be cooperating with Mueller as well, who was sort of presented to the world about a month ago. So that's significant, that Mueller has two more cards that he can play in this game still.
Philip, keeping in mind that you're speaking to a Canadian audience here, we hear people talk about that word impeachment occasionally. It's a political process, not a legal one. Where are we on the road towards even the possibility of impeachment?
Right, we're exactly where we were yesterday, which is not even at the starting line. We're probably, 400 yards behind the starting line, 400 meters behind the starting line, I should say. When you say it's a political process, it's important to reinforce what that means. It means that in order for Donald Trump to be removed from office, it is up to people on Capitol Hill to do so. And Capitol Hill, as people are probably familiar, is controlled by Republicans. Republicans have no interest, particularly right now when they're about to pass this big tax package, which is something they've been working on for a very long time. There's no interest in actually moving forward with any sort of impeachment of Donald Trump. Now, we'll have to wait and see what happens after the primaries next year. I mean, every Republican who is a member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election next year. A lot of them are going to face primary challenges from other Republicans, and they're not going to want to speak out against a still popular president with Republicans. After that, though, we'll see.
So that's impeachment and the political process. Kenneth, what about the possibility of criminal charges against the president? Not even whether the evidence is there. Let's put that aside, because we're not at that point yet. But whether we would ever see criminal charges against a sitting president.
Yeah, there are a few sort of parallel tracks moving in the Mueller investigation as well as the congressional investigations, and it's hard to see how any of them really get to that point. You certainly have the potential obstruction of justice or maybe even perjury track, and what Flynn is offering could potentially advance things along that route a little bit because he is telling a story to Mueller that can be used to check for discrepancies in the statements that have been made by other senior members of the team, including Donald Trump. In fact, Donald Trump explicitly said to the press, not necessarily to Robert Mueller or to anyone around the Mueller team, that he did not instruct Flynn to participate in any kind of back-channel communications with Sergei Kislyak. Now we have the very real possibility that he was at least aware of them, or certainly senior members of his team were. So if it could be shown that he lied, again, not to the press, unfortunately it's not a crime, though I wish it were, to lie to the press, but to law enforcement about that, then you could potentially have either an obstruction of justice or perjury charge. You have the bigger collusion issue and what it would take to bring criminal charges there. I don't think we're anywhere close to that. And then you have this other sort of less talked about track in which they're examining, the Mueller team as well as congressional investigators are examining President Trump's business interests and how they may overlap with Russia and whether his debts are tied to Russia. And that, I think, we're even further from the possibility of any kind of criminal charges.
Philip, we have just 30 seconds left. Let me give the last word to you. And this is a tough one. I mean, away from New York City, away from Washington, D.C., particularly among that, 30% of people, the core supporters of Donald Trump, do you think that their faith in him will be shaken at all by the Flynn guilty plea?
No, not in the least. I mean, there are very few Americans who, at this point in time, are still willing to have their minds changed about Donald Trump. People who hate him are pretty much going to hate him for as long as he's president. People who love him, seems the opposite is true. You know, we've already seen some of the reaction here. The reaction is, oh, this is, this is all they can get on Flynn is one thing that was pretty common today. Oh, Flynn, of course, he's a liar. He's in Washington was another thing. People who want to defend Trump are going to keep defending Trump. I don't see this changing that at all.
All right, Philip Bump, Kenneth Vogel, thank you very much for speaking with us tonight.
Thank you.
Of course.
And still ahead on The National, as Syrian peace talks stall in Geneva, a group of women are fighting for their chance to have a say in shaping their country's future.
Now is always the right time to do everything. If we wait until the negotiations are over and then we're starting everything from zero, it's going to be a lot harder.
The language was provocative, irresponsible, politically speaking, and goes beyond the hopes of the Syrian people in this kind of talks.
And with that, representatives of the Syrian government left peace talks in Geneva, threatening not to return. The government delegation and the opposition can't agree on a key issue, the future of President Bashar al-Assad. The opposition insists there is no place for him in the post-war political transition. So Syria's future still hangs in the balance, but who are the people deciding what happens next? As one group of Syrian women have pointed out, it's mostly men. Women make up half of the country's population, but so far have had very little to say at the negotiating table. Well, Neil Cooksall met with one of the women fighting to change that.
The reality is brutal. But now, if not a blank slate, there's at least a chance for change in Syria. Women like Dima Musa are demanding it. She's part of what these women say is a first for Syria, a feminist women's political movement. We spoke in Istanbul.
There are different types of women in Syrian society. There are women who wear hijab, women who don't. A lot of women have professional careers, and some are stay-at-home mothers and wives. But for a lot of us, our mothers and grandmothers had careers, had college degrees, they worked outside the house.
Syria's opposition feminists say they want women of all political backgrounds to have at least 30% of the seats at the negotiating table.
You know, there are going to be people who say, men who say, this is not the time, there are too many other issues to focus on, this just isn't the time.
now is always the right time to do everything. If we wait until the negotiations are over and then we're starting everything from zero, it's going to be a lot harder.
Musa moved to the U.S. when she was 14. Long before the war, it was dangerous for people like her parents who didn't openly support the government.
What do you say to people who might say you don't belong at the table, not because you're a woman, but because you've been away from Syria, outside of the country for so long?
Well, as women everywhere in the world, we know what it's like to be a woman trying to live in and work in politics or even in the professional world. But as Syrian women, I think we also have that from our environments, whether they are inside Syria or they've been transported somewhere else. But also a large portion of the women in the movement are actually from Syria, and most of them have recently left Syria.
Why do you think you have to fight just to get a place at the negotiations?
Traditional roles, and I think in times of war, this is even, it's more so because you have a lot of the violence that's happening, and a lot of times men think that this is not the place for women. They need to protect them. But I don't think there's an excuse at all for the political bodies to not have the women representatives.
The UN's Syria envoy created a special advisory group for Syrian women. Good intentions, bad execution, these Syrian feminists say, that pushes women to the margins of the conversation.
There is always an attempt to push back. There's always an attempt to sort of marginalize what you say and what you do. And unless you sort of stand there and make sure that, no, this is what I believe and this is what I think is true. You know, you have to also support other women. Women need to support each other more.
But how do you go about bringing all of the different factions in Syria together? It's not just about the opposition and the government anymore.
We are very committed to equality. Of course, equality between men and women, and equality between or among all components of the Syrian population. It is very important to have that codified.
What still binds you to Syria after all this time?
This is a really tough question. A lot of people ask me that because for me it's been almost 25 years since I've left Syria, and I was a kid when I left. I think it has a lot to do with probably the upbringing, the sense that we didn't leave Syria happy. Nobody leaves their country and goes somewhere completely new, a new language, a new culture, because they want to. Most of the time they're forced to. And having had the chance to live somewhere where I had all the freedoms that you have in most Western countries, I thought that, you know, Syrians deserve that too.
It's emotional.
It is. It is. We happened to live in a building that had 16 units, and every unit had a family that came from a completely different background. You had people who were way far left to people who are so religious they've probably gone to Hajj 5 times. But everybody got along so well, and I felt like we're all Syrians. I never thought that this family is Christian, this family is Alawite, this family is Sunni. So that, I think that feeling always comes back to me.
And you see that for its future now?
I see that for its future.
Is it possible?
Everything is possible.
We'll be back in a moment, but remember, you can go deeper on the stories of the day earlier in the day. Subscribe to our newsletter at cbcnews.ca/thenational. On The National tonight, reports that next week the U.S. may recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That would be an extremely controversial move. Palestinians lay claim to East Jerusalem, while Israel claims the city as its seat of government. The broader international community, beyond the U.S., believes the dispute should be resolved in a wider peace agreement. An emotional moment today in Bangladesh as Pope Francis met with Rohingya Muslim refugees. And for the first time on his Asian trip, he publicly used the word Rohingya. That's significant because Myanmar's government refuses to use that term. It views the Rohingya as illegal immigrants. Francis called for the group to be given respect.
If you hear this attack warning signal in circumstances other than a test, get inside. If you are indoors, stay indoors.
That was an attack warning signal that went off across the state of Hawaii today. It hasn't been used since the Cold War, but it's back because of North Korea. Officials want residents and tourists to be prepared for a potential nuclear attack.
Well, today was Sounds of the Season at the Broadcast Centre here in Toronto, one of many food bank fundraisers being held at CBC stations across the country. And that had a lot of people here very early in the morning.
Live from Glenn Gould's studio. People got here in line at 1 a.m. this morning.
My idea was to be in line at 4 a.m. Kim phoned me yesterday saying, Di, we need to leave Oakville at 1 a.m.
Let your backbone slide. Just let it slide. Just let it slide. Sounds of the season. Somebody say yeah. Yeah. Say oh yeah.
And scenes like that, well, maybe not quite like that, but anyway, repeated throughout the day here at CBC. $340,000 raised for food banks in Toronto. A huge number, but man, nothing, well, something, but sure is fascinating to see how Vancouver did today.
Yeah, no, and in Vancouver, Open House and Food Bank Day is always huge in Vancouver, right? So right now, I'm looking at the total, and I just want to make sure I get the actual official count right now. $695,157.78. So it was a great time here, and you know, great to meet people. It always feels like a bit like a family reunion, you know. So you know, people who've always watched us for so long. So a lot of fun today.
And that's the National for December 1st.
Good night.
Good night.